Good evening, architects. I hope we are all ready. I didn't know that I was so powerful that I'll speak and people will listen to me so keenly. I really didn't know. I didn't realize just now. Anyways, so Indian Institute of Architects, welcome everybody today. So on this program schedule, it has been said, rather instructed to me to give a brief description of architect Ravindra Punde. I do not know. Rather, it's a question to all. 4 pages cannot be a brief. I mean, it's of such a stretcher. I do not know how to make your profile brief, but I'm trying to make it a brief for such a person like you, sir. Architect Ravindra Punde is an architect and an urban and regional planner. Did his architecture at the Academy of Architecture, Mumbai, and urban and regional planning from the School of Planning and Architecture, New Delhi. He is also the co-founder of landscape and planning practice Design Cell, which works rather basely in Gurgaon and Mumbai. Ravindra sir has extensive experience in master planning, landscape and urban projects. He has successfully led several national and international competitions for Design Cell. His practice extends in many parts of India, where he has led his team to design and execute large and complex projects. In addition to that, he has taught at the School of Planning and Architecture, Delhi, Academy of Architecture, Mumbai, and is the co-founder and director of SEA, Mumbai. He currently serves on the Governing Council of Rachana Sansad, the parent trust of Academy of Architecture, Mumbai, and also a co-founder and a founder trustee of the School of Environment and Architecture, Mumbai. That's good enough, sir? Thank God.
I don't know maybe more people. You might know more about me.
See, it's really big. I was thinking how to minimize it, but anyways, don't take me otherwise, sir. So, sir, if you please come up on stage. Can I please call architect Anjan Mitro to felicitate Ravindra sir? Please, sir. Yes, sir. A big round of applause for him, please.
Thank you. Thank you. There's nothing in it though. We'll get you, sir. Yeah.
We'll make sure, sir. We'll get you something for next time.
Thank you so much. I'll also like to leave this with you. Yeah.
So, in addition to this, I would like to congratulate IIA for getting a wonderful sponsor from Voltas Limited. So, can we have Shopto Shigupto, Zonal Head Sales, Eastern Region on the stage? A big round of applause, please. Shudip Mukherjee. Mr. Shudip Mukherjee, Zonal Head Customer Care, Eastern Region, Voltas. And Mr. Rajiv Shen, Region Head HR, Eastern Region, please. To felicitate them, it's an honor. May I have Indrani Dhar, Architect Indrani Dhar, to please come up on stage. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Voltus. So to start with, may I call Architect Ritam Sarkar, Chairman, Indian Institute of Architects, West Bengal Chapter, to have a word. Thank you. So before that, may I have Mr. Ranjan Dotto, Director, MS Region Elevators Private Limited, who has not only endorsed IIA but has also helped us for maintenance and for this lift. Thank you. May I call Partho sir for it? Please, sir. A big round of applause for him. Come on. It's a big relief for everybody, I guess. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Over to you, Chairman, sir. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. On behalf of Indian Institute of Architects, West Bengal Chapter, I welcome you all to this wonderful seminar of recent trends of sustainable architecture in India. We have with us our esteemed guest, Professor Ravindra Punde, to share his expertise on the subject. We are grateful to him that he has taken out his valuable time to enlighten us on this topic. On behalf of the chapter, I take this privilege to thank him. I would like to call up Mr. Ravindra Punde to say a few words about today's topic. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, it's okay. So thank you, Ritam. It's not few words, it's a lot of words. And I have to tell you that Amitabh complicated my life a little bit by giving me 1 week's notice to come here and talk. And then just this morning saying, it's not just your talk, you need to also show some projects. So here I am with a 5,000 word talk for about 45 minutes, and I have a 40 slide presentation. So you'll have to go through it with me, okay? And actually, ideally it will be very nice if at the end of it we can have a little Q&A and have a little discussion, I think. Okay, so as you may have heard, my life kind of straddles strongly between academia and practice. In fact, we had an office even in New York when we were at the peak of our practice. So, and it's been a very interesting journey. So the presentation, therefore, also kind of echoes that split in my life. Okay, split or confluence. So that's something which you guys have to figure out. But maybe in our practice work, you might see that what we speak or what we try to teach in the academic space kind of begins to reflect in the kind of work that we do. And that's how it should be. We at C actually believe it's very important for all of us young architects to become thinkers. So we orient them to become almost, shall I use the word, speculators. Because as architects, you're constantly speculating the future. And so to us, that speculation is extremely important. And so I used to run a studio for our semester 9, which I used to call the futures. And so he was trying to look at semester after semester or year after year what that means. And so much of the writing here actually is academic in nature, and we will then go on to the projects, which is somewhere on the laptop somewhere, so we'll just do that. Okay, so since the subject was sustainability, I thought instead of speaking about what is happening in the country and passing some information, I thought I'll just take the opportunity an academic has to always be a little provocative and, tinker with everybody's mind to ask some questions. And so I'm going to construct some questions here. And I hope that when I show you some of our work, you might be able to connect some of those dots there, okay? But as you all know, it's a constant search. There is never a perfect end answer to these questions. It's a constant flow and a constant search to many of the questions that we actually constantly face in life, not just in practice. So that's how it is. So I kind of marked Arun Jaitley's speech in the parliament, where for the first time, I think, the government recognized, or rather government emphasized, the need to connect in their minds urban growth and economic growth. And when we were students, we were all constantly thinking about regional development. We were constantly talking about development of small and medium-sized towns. But I think that was a turning moment in our history or rather the recent history, where the emphasis came up on urban development. So at that time, I had actually written a little paper, which is also part of this thing. So I'll just kind of go through these, and I'm going to read it. So let's say, the important point here to make, and this is about the smart city mission, but I started looking at the context at that time. And today we are about 35% of India's cities, we are a 35% urbanized population, right? By 2050, we are expected to be somewhere around 60% urban population, right? Now you can imagine post-independence till today, we've come up to, not from 0, but we are at 35. And we are talking about the next 25 years or 26 years in which we will more than double our urban population. So I have 3 major concerns that I wish to highlight. 1, our cities are already stretched for resources. 2, our cities are increasingly becoming vulnerable due to environmental degradation and climate change. And 3, which is of course a very important social aspect, that access to opportunities within the cities between communities is extremely skewed, right? Like most of our metropolises now, Mumbai floods virtually every monsoon. And pardon my background in Mumbai, so I'm just kind of using those examples, bringing the city to a grinding halt. The frequency of such events is increasing year after year. There is water all over, right? Yet by the onset of summer, it shouts for water with a parched throat, right? It cannot supply water to its citizens in adequate measure. A city that is endowed with 2.5 cubic meter of water for every square meter of ground every monsoon cannot manage this blessing, if you want to look at it that way. The monsoon was something we looked forward to as children, and I think many of us did. It is an integral part of our culture. It exists in our poetry. It has a place of pride in our music and literature. Yet today, somehow, we have made it our enemy. There's something not right in the way we planned our place. There's something not right in the way we've designed our place, right? Now the question here is that colonized knowledge that has done it to us? And therefore, and that's because the British called it the foul weather, right? The city of Mumbai stretches its arms over 200 kilometers to get water from Vaitarna. To a large extent, it deprives those regions of its resources. The Center for Science and Environment, in its various studies, has pointed towards conflicts emerging due to this skewed distribution of resources. In a country like ours with limited resources and democracy have to operate in the same space, settlements will have to be carefully looked at its key resources. It has to carefully look at its key resource footprint, and judicious resource security is central to its sustainable existence. Let me come to my next concern. The next concern is the state of our physical environment and its vulnerability. As one looks at history of the physical growth of our megacities, one notices a distinct trend of constant interventions into its key natural features, either by way of development needs or by encroachments. These natural systems were transient spaces. These spaces and systems were extremely dynamic and acted as sponges that helped manage the environmental factor over time to mitigate disaster. Bangalore had a very efficient regime of tanks that managed its water system through a process of holding, overflow, and draining out. In Delhi, the Nazafgarh Jheel was one such space that extended 300 square kilometers at one time, that acted as a sponge to manage the overflow from the Sahibi River, either going to the Yamuna, or the flow from the Aravalis in Gurgaon and the backflow from the Yamuna. So that was like a sponge space, right? These spaces function dynamically as a resilience infrastructure with rich biodiversity reserves. People experiencing poverty invariably settle in this soft ground. As there is no alternative arrangement, and these are relatively less managed spaces by the city, over time, these have become extremely vulnerable to floods, waterlogging, pollution, etc. Climate change is an important phenomenon that all cities will have to deal with. Our cities will have to build a careful structure of resilience infrastructure. Finally, the quality and the nature of public realm. This is what defines a city. The public realm is what defines a city. Our cities have a very highly skewed distribution of both the public realm as well as land distribution. In Mumbai, 92% of the people use the combination of public transport and walking to get to their destinations. Barely 8% of its population uses private motorized transport for mobility, yet you cannot walk a mile safely on a pavement in most of our cities. Another vital statistic is that about 60% of Mumbai's population lives on just 8% of land. In the suburbs where most of the population lives, there are almost no playgrounds, no public institutions, no cultural value to this location. Public spaces in a city that is home to a large poor communities play an important role as extensions to their living experience. What I mean here is that the poor then begin to use the public realm as an extension of their living space, right? And that is the need. And I think as planners, architects, thinkers, we need to accept this reality. And we need to begin to think of a way of looking at all of these issues. Okay? A just distribution between land parcels to build and public realm is critical to the well-being of the poor in particular and public at large. So the three key issues of our context and complexities of our urban environment, of resource scarcity and its footprint, environmental remediation and resilience infrastructure, and the expansion of its distribution of the public realm is, in my opinion, something which is central. So, as an overall framework, these three issues may be, and this is what I'm going to suggest, is firstly to figure out methods of how do we reduce demand. You can imagine, I did see a presentation by a very senior planning official, where in Singapore, had demonstrated through some of the greenfield projects that sound urban design practices and digital simulation studies, you can work with the wind flow over an entire township to facilitate natural ventilation of apartments and offices that would reduce heat gain and generate cross ventilation. The urban massing system also generates shades to reduce the heat island effect on streets and spaces. So there is that possibility that we can actually explore. The other important thing is to network resources. And what I mean by that is, right now, let's say we are in a position where our urban development kind of puts up preconditions of generating or becoming net zero buildings, right? There is institutional land. Can we not develop a network where that resource can be actually shared amongst the city, within the city? And so the argument is that there are adequate examples of building designed to hold rainwater, treated, supply it, which is what we all do, treated water discharge is used, and all excess treated water in its neighborhood could be interconnected to be used as a resource to balance requirements through smart technologies where communities manage, and where the communities could actually manage their own resource base. So, here are some of the things that I think are extremely important. We need to kind of rethink our organizational structure of our settlements to be able to kind of address some of these major issues. So after that policy, I think the next teacher was the pandemic. And I think there are many lessons to be learned. So COVID-19 had opened up many questions about our understanding of societal relationships in all forms and at all levels. Quite simply, how the situation influences our existing relationships and frameworks of different systems is still fully not understood. Has the world changed forever? The route to new normalcy has been far too disruptive, painful, and disorienting, not known to humankind in recent times. Today we live in a very interconnected world. It is precisely this interconnectedness that spread the virus over such a short period. The same interconnectedness or a globalized way of life is supposed to bring huge benefits to humankind. We are also wrapped in several other issues of global economic order. Increasing differences and unpredictability of the impact of climate change with a degrading environment. All of these dichotomies, from pandemic to climate change, are global and rooted in this very interconnectedness, largely unpredictable, that breeds a sense of uncertainty at all levels, from local to the global. What was the casualty? In my opinion, during COVID, trust was the biggest casualty. I'll elaborate a little bit. Trust is the next casualty after certainty and predictability. The trust deficit is a direct consequence of the behavior of nations, if you recall the time, institutions, communities, and individuals during the pandemic. China did not reveal the truth to the world in time for fear of economic backlash, thus losing the world's trust. Institutions such as the WHO lost the world's trust as an independent professional institution working for the larger common good. In India, at the city level, despite several efforts by the state under a frugal resource base, the lockdown crammed the workers indoors with little support and no income certainty. The migrant workers who earn a daily wage, who had come to the city in the hope of a better life than the rural wretchedness of poverty, hunger, and humiliating discrimination, also lost trust in the city. They were left alone to fend for themselves with no guarantees of work in the immediate future, no income, and in most cases, little support for health and food. Some 23 million workers chose to walk back 1,000 miles with their loved ones, with the burden of their belongings, with their young and old on their head and shoulders, with little food and water and an empty stomach, to that very place they had left. They wanted to return home, any which way, at the cost of their lives, a home defined not by shelter and better living condition, but by relationships of trust and love. Such was the scale and the nature of human tragedy borne by the crisis of trust. On the other hand, the lockdown opened up alternative opportunities for most white-collared workers to work from home. Several organizations continue to work and pay their staff to whatever extent possible. In most cases, it triggered a new arrangement between work and home where work timings brought some flexibility, new patterns of sharing domestic responsibilities emerged. This was made possible due to the interconnectedness made available through the internet. It opens up a new way of life for many young workers. Clearly, a new fault line has been added to an already divided society by the difference in opportunities to different classes. The pandemic situation demanded new ways of seeing our urban environment. This need is not only related to the pandemic alone. A more comprehensive picture can emerge if we see this as a larger, evolving story of climate change, environment, health, globalization, and the growing divides within our societies. While experts, institutions, and intergovernmental agencies may better handle some of these issues, such as climate change and economy, the response to the pandemic may be anchored more in the everyday, community, and individual responses. That is not to say that the role of the government and people is less important in either case. I want to therefore come to the point that we need to reimagine our future. So for several decades, cities' development is based on ideas of static land use plans over a 20-year horizon and FSI as control instruments. Huge gaps in health, education, public open space, and other infrastructure continue to be ignored, plan after plan, with the increasing frequency of changes in developmental demands, alongside various vulnerabilities due to environmental disruption, climate change, and the recent pandemic. And I think we can ill afford a sleepy long-term master plan anymore. A plan of static land use, developed through a limited lens, leaves a large majority of people out of its vision, making them even more vulnerable to the adverse impact of these events. There is a need to reimagine a future that will bring some certainty and predictability. Re-establish trust, blur the divide. We need a new vision of a resilient city that develops cities' capacity to adapt and change with the rapidly changing conditions. This calls for new definitions in urban spatial understandings, categorization of urban space, and new imaginations of infrastructure that allow for substantial adaptability and agility is extremely important. It calls for a new configuration that possibly abandons the rigid notion of land use categorization that is spread horizontally over space to one that is multifunctional, agile use of urban space as infrastructure that is imagined in layers over time. We can begin to think of our city over time, and I think that can become a very interesting way of looking at it. An idea that is anchored more in location, less in territory, more in commons, less in ownership. In a society such as ours, with frugal resources, a shifting spatial use may better optimize opportunities across society and build a resilient and agile space use to respond to the dynamic needs of development alongside uncertainties of our times. The pandemic and the lockdown have opened up a fascinating new dimension. And that, to me, is a sense of collective consciousness. A consciousness that brings to the front a new connectedness through the digital world. The frugality with which we can survive, the significance of health and family, connectedness with immediate community, and finally, the improved environmental quality that encouraged a pause and drew our attention to the rich biodiversity around us in that period. Recognizing that these possibilities were always known to us. We always knew that we were always connected through various means, right? However, what is different now is that the pandemic created conditions of experiencing these for a prolonged period across society during the lockdown. This allowed these attributes to be internalized, and become a part of our collective consciousness of an alternative way of life. At the level of the state too, there are serious, urgent engagements of alternative thinking. To give a few examples, the emphasis on health and health infrastructure, government's way of seeing globalization, and if you recall, around this time, the idea of Atmanirbhar, self-reliant economy, was born again within the same framework and use the digital technology to collect data and improve responses to health services. A comprehensive public discourse is needed on all fronts to explore the new thinking within the governments at various levels and public at large to explore the need for new conceptual frameworks for city planning that are relevant to our times and respond to the opportunities this collective consciousness brings to the table. When I was at SPA, we studied all planning theories, and at some point I kind of gave up on all these international theories. And I got down to looking at Indian thinkers in urban planning. I couldn't find any. Ended up reading Gandhi and Raja Mohan Roy and all of this social activists and social revolutionary people who actually helped formulate society. So that still remains within me. Somehow it's still there. And so while on a visit to, I'm just saying that, does Gandhian thinking have any clues for us? We obviously can't go back to that. Go back to that way of living. But there are some clues there which I think we need to look at. So while I was taking my students to Ahmedabad, which is the place to go to in your early years of architecture, so I used to take students there. So while on a visit to the Gandhi ashram, I walked across the ashram to visit Bapuji Ni Kutir. Okay? I was completely moved by its presence. This is the house where Gandhi lived for over a decade. Frugal, austere, and humble. Right? It triggered a different consciousness in me. While I understood and appreciated Korea's building with my trained eye, I was trained to appreciate that, right? I sensed Bapuji's Kutir. There was none of that training came in play, but I think it evoked a different sensibility in me. Clearly, there was something more to it. The Kutir and its environment evoked a sense of its inhabitation and its practices. The care for its environment and the built was embedded in the way of living, a way of living that was so frugal and humble that it seemed to liberate itself from the worldly trappings. The beauty rested in these virtues, the elements that constituted the simplicity, its perfection, and its caring, the belonging with the environment, and the joy in its inhabitation is some ways completely liberating. That, to me, was the idea of Sampurna Swaraj. The idea of Sampurna Swaraj was always been associated with freedom from the British Raj. While that was one of the most important engagements, the idea of Sampurna Swaraj is anchored elsewhere. It is anchored in the idea of true liberation of the mind. The liberation essential for a different form of interdependence, a wider connectedness that engages in pursuits of development, of developing a worldview, knowledge and wisdom. For that to occur, freedom and true democratic values need to thrive. To achieve that free state, it is vital to be liberated from being substantially material dependent. That idea works through a practice of bodily engagements, austerity, frugality, and living within the means of your immediate environment, something that one can sense in the kutir. It is reasonable to argue that such a construct is built on inherited contradictions. On one hand, it proposes a highly localized dependency, while on the other, it speaks of larger connectedness. Both positions are equally essential for the idea. The argument is based on the premise that in order to have a healthy, productive relationship with the world, it is essential that one is fiercely independent. Underlying this question of inherited contradiction is the prevailing nature of transactional relationships. A large part of this transactional relationship is embedded in the idea of consumption today. It therefore raises some important questions about the world we have created, where the notion of development are measured on a scale of consumption. This brings into question the issue of resources and the larger discourse on environment and human relationships around it. We focus our attention on three important related questions of urban environment and architecture now. Today, our urban environments have become unmanageable under its centrality and agglomeration. The centrality being a product of the nature of our economic order. Let us take the case of water in Mumbai and its relationship with its region. We are all aware that our water comes from various locations, some of which are as far as 200 kilometers. The pipeline rips through several parched areas, and the resources are fenced in its linear flow from the source to destination. It moves to hide itself in the ground. I'm being a little poetic here, but disrupting a democratic relationship. It is rather strange that a city that gets 2,500 mm of rain has to run a few hundred miles to draw its water for itself at the cost of the local communities and their rightful dependencies. And I think I'm really very concerned because as democracy deepens, this is going to become an increasing question, and it will become a planning and design question. We live in a contaminated urban environment generated by indifferent mega systems. The tired and overburdened centralized urban infrastructure is unable to provide adequate clean drinking water, manage sewer or waste disposal, thereby dumping it in its raw form from the city's waterways or deep into the ocean. New landforms are created. In fact, we had a research agenda, what we called as post-intensive landscapes, where we actually started looking at the new scars that we have started creating on our environment, including mining, starting from mining, which is an old practice, to our big garbage dumps in the city. That's the new landscape that we are creating. So, those new landforms are created by indiscriminate waste disposal, not just polluting the air, but seriously contaminating and rapidly depleting groundwater resources through soil contamination and leaches. And finally, I think we have lost empathy and a sense of larger common good. Architectural and city level norms practice cannot innovate and deal with the emerging situation of inadequate and skewed distribution of resources. The stress on resources and other vested interest is taking its toll on the urban environment. These conflicts have generated discomforting adjacencies, creating uncomfortable relationships among communities over urban resources. How do we negotiate and navigate this conundrum? Among many other relations, and many other relating questions of economic and social order with its politics and issues of urban environment that require repositioning, the nature of the relationship with these resources and architectural forms and its spatial configuration become essential. We need new ways of seeing our built environment at a larger scale and the building itself as a principal unit. So there is an architectural question for all of us in this. Does this not raise an important question about how we think our cities and its architecture should be? Is it possible to think of development of neighborhoods and the building unit within the framework of the idea of carrying capacity? I am alluding to some of the Gandhian ideas. A form of Sampurna Swaraj, or maybe we can call it urban Swaraj. An idea whose time has re-emerged, if I may say, in these changing times. In fact, this was a studio project that we did in the third year at sea. What I termed as urban Swaraj is to begin to think of the unit or the building being a response to its resource base. And so we were trying to see what kind of architecture does it produce, what kind of practices do you induce in a building, and you also begin to construct a culture of how do you live in that building and what your relationships become and all of that. So we were trying to investigate that, and it was quite interesting and a fascinating moment for us. Okay. The third important thing is nature in design. I'm sure many of you must have read James Lovelock. So in 1972, James Lovelock introduced a remarkable shift in the scientific thinking in the sphere of environment. He introduced natural systems as a self-governing system, what is called the Gaia hypothesis. An idea occurred to him one afternoon in 1965 while talking to Carl Sagan, I think most of us know, and philosopher Daniel Hitchcock while he was working for NASA. The Gaia hypothesis speculates that some regulatory system must keep our environment in a relatively constant condition, and that a regulatory system could be the terrestrial life itself. A system in which human life is also one of the participating partners. Therefore, what we do to our planet will also depend on where we do it. Lovelock further argued that the vital organs of Gaia may be the landscapes of estuaries, wetlands, the muds, alluding to the significance of these elements in the process of readjusting systems on Earth. He proposed that until we know more about the Earth, it is better to tread gently or let it be on its own. Around the same time, several important theoretical frameworks and practices evolved alongside the emerging environmental discourse. One such philosophy is the environmental philosophy of deep ecology proposed by the Norwegian philosopher Arnes Næss. The philosophy expanded on ecology to mean a way of life. It argued for an interconnectedness and a self-regulatory system. It therefore advocates a way of life that is non-violent in relationship with organisms. Næss found Gandhi's thinking in line with the conceptualization and was influenced by it. Closer home, and I think this is something very important for all of us to draw cues from. Closer home, when Gandhi decided to move his ashram to Sabarmati, he had established the principles of building the ashram. With limited resources, more so from resources within its immediate environment. He also demonstrated some other principles that were rooted in the idea of ahimsa, non-violence. During the course of setting up the ashram and subsequently in its inhabitation, life was governed by the principles of non-violence and compassion for all life forms on one hand, and respect and engagement with the continuum and the dynamism of the nature of nature on the other. When they identified the location for Sabarmati River, it was inhabited by many life forms. On one occasion, when the decision was being made to clear some land for habitation and community habitation, the community was motivated to respect all life forms and not kill snakes and other living beings that were thought to be life-threatening. On another occasion, when Gandhi sought some leaves, the ashramites were strictly told not to disturb the vegetation at night, and least of all pluck leaves at night, as it was the resting time for the trees and all forms of it. In some ways, the ashram became a partner in the dynamic lived environment. The ashram as a space with a biotic life around and within the river was all a continuum. I think this is something very important. The ashram belonged to this continuum, right? And engaged with it beyond the notion of a property. Gandhi's most famous speeches were on the dry bed of the Sabarmati. He came to be known as the Sabarmati ka Sant. The ashram embraced and engaged with the dynamic, temporal, and interconnected nature of the environment. I have to tell you a little story just to break this. When I took the students, and I'm talking about territory, how our new economic thinking, I mean, I call this new the way we think our economics is, how our new economic thinking is so much territory bound. I mean, how often do we really draw everything that's around us when we draw a plot of land? We really rarely do, right? So it's very, very territory bound. And the lines and the idea of ownership is anchored in almost a Judeo-Christian kind of ideation from where that idea comes. So when I'd taken my students to Jaisalmer, not to study the architecture, because this school that we started was a school of environment and architecture. So I took them to Jaisalmer to understand how Jaisalmer survives. How did it build its culture to substantiate its existence and support it? And so that was the idea that the student should get exposed to, because that's where I think you germinate a creative thinking. So I met this very old gentleman, and I'm talking of the lines, imaginary lines that economics draws. So he was talking about trade in the good old days. Much of Jaisalmer's trade was with the West, right? तो he said, साहब, हमें तो पता ही नहीं लगा कि हम ट्रेडर से स्मगलर कब बन गए, right? Because somebody somewhere, he doesn't know. Somebody somewhere drew a line to say this is the other side now. And so for him it was a continuum, right? And our friend Dilip was, Partha, Dilip was with me the other day and he was asking me a question. That, do you see things differently? Or, no, he asked me a question, do you see things, is there a different way of seeing, or do you see different things? Right? And that's where you kind of hit the point, that we need to begin to see the world around in a very, very different way. And I think that's what we try to provoke students to kind of begin to question some of these ideas. Okay. So, and this is pretty much the last part of my bhashan, and then I'll show you the projects. This is a theoretical formulation that I created almost in the school while teaching, that how do we see this world now? And so I kind of developed this theoretical framework of stratum, which kind of somewhat draws from Ian McHugh's idea. But I developed this theory and I used it for students to begin to work and play with these different ideas. So I had written this little piece, and I'm going to read this for all of you. This was the so-called introduction to the studio, but I'll just read that because I think it makes a point. So basically I'm saying that we are connecting the dots, probably a way of seeing the future. Okay? NASA on Thursday, 1st of May, selected space firm SpaceX, Blue Origin, and another one to build lunar landing systems that can carry astronauts to the moon by 2024. At one time, Elon Musk, the owner of SpaceX, wondered why American space program was abandoned over the past 30-odd years. According to him, human habitation should have reached the moon and Mars by now, instead of waiting for some event to cause human extinction. Right? And Bruno Latour, who's no more poor chap, the philosopher from France, actually made an argument about this statement, that here it is, the oligarchs want to now leave the earth and go on to the Mars and leave the wretched earth to us. Right? So his company, SpaceX, has been successful with several projects that have taken their giant leap towards this goal, and all of this has become now pretty much real. Okay? At the same time, look at what's happening around us. At the same time, Amazon, Blue Origin, is working through several of its subsidiaries on many new ideas that would redefine human habitation on Earth. And I'm coming to this. It is working on a floating delivery station, flying warehouses that use drones to deliver products, thus reducing delivery time. These are several spatial imaginations, and they're related to space and city, right? There are several spatial imaginations, such as the beehive, and a fulfillment center of goods that is wandering like a drone in the sky, a high-rise delivery center in the middle of the city. It is introducing new forms of environments in the town that would not only bring in newly built and shifting spaces that are not anchored in location, but will substantially disrupt and redefine transport and delivery. It's coming. What is significant about these developments is that all of these are imagined with insignificant human interface. Much of it operates through the Internet of Things. I don't know how many of you know, but in 2012, we surpassed. There was internet connecting more things than people. That happened in 2012. So, the nature and extent, so what is significant about these developments is that all of these are imagined with insignificant human intervention. Much of it operates through the Internet of Things, Alexa. The nature and extent of Alexa's engagement in our lives is unimaginable. She would be inhabiting everything. Your voice will be her command. No handheld device, no app, no two-finger typing, simply faster. These imaginations of artificial intelligence and robotics will take over almost all human activities that the robot performs more efficiently. The number of such activities is increasing. This brings into question the need for human work. Thus, with the fragile relationship of place, space, and income with work, is a new paradigm. A new paradigm will emerge where ideas such as universal income may become necessary. Much of this emerging reality results from a globalized world order that responds to the flow of capital and investment, innovation, scales of operation, access to global talent pool, and a global market. Clearly, there are visible benefits of globalization. However, the globalized economy has yet to succeed in delivering the promised ubiquitous global prosperity as imagined. There is enough empirical evidence to show that while global wealth has increased, income disparities have grown to alarming proportions. In India, the conditions are no different. The discourse on universal income has its presence in India too, but for entirely different reasons. It is to take care of the subsistence of a large mass of its population due to inadequate income and growing disparity. While some of these problems of discriminatory development and human suffering are deeply entrenched in class, caste, and gender, many are closely related to the nature of geopolitics emerging from the very idea of globalization. These are new forms of challenges we need to deal with given our current civilizational thinking. So there is also this discussion on the Anthropocene, right? So by pure definition, the Anthropocene is a concept in a geological time scale to be determined by the International Commission of Stratigraphy. The process of this determination is currently on and may take some time to establish and reach an agreement to declare the change in geological time. The question of a changing geological time scale was first introduced to the world by Paul Crutzen, an atmospheric chemist and a Nobel laureate. Since introducing this formulation, several disciplines have argued and interpreted this phenomenon. Earth system scientists argue that the entire cross-section of the Earth as a complete system from the ground and its substrata to the atmospheric space is going through a significant change. Its evidence lies in the changing global temperature after a relatively stable Holocenic period and the rise of sea levels. Other arguments are more multidisciplinary and causal. These arguments are based directly on human intervention and point towards urbanization and the alteration of landscapes, species extinction, resource extraction, and other activities that have disrupted natural cycles. So the world around us is changing quite rapidly, okay? And there are some positions that are emerging in our opinion. So the digital world is opening up a new possibility, right? While raising significant questions on human relationship, it is redefining human engagement with space, ranging from what may no longer be called outer space to at one level, while redefining existing spatial arrangements of the built environment within our own cities. The economic order built from the Scottish Renaissance period and its journey through capitalism, then through the idea of free market, and finally globalization has not yielded the expected ubiquitous well-being, thus disrupting the socio-economic fabric with inequalities across the globe. Number 3, the Earth system is undergoing a disruptive transformation caused by human activities such as altering landscapes, resource extraction, and urbanization. These positions have a global impact. Their effect is somewhat uncertain and unpredictable. However, in India, at the local level, the subject of built and unbuilt urban environments continues to dwell largely in a business as usual manner. Infrastructure such as roads, highways, expressways, metros, airports require huge attention and investment. You can listen to Gadkari. He will tell you how you can reach in few minutes from here to there, how many millions of crores of rupees is being spent on this, that, and that's where our attention is. The predominant discourse within the country is currently governed by urban mobility and transit-oriented development at the urban level, with FSI and volume-based formal developments essentially operated through the market and real estate. That's where we are. That's how our urban development is structured. The discourse on urban poverty is also opening up questions of social justice, specifically the rights of the poor and the underprivileged. But then there is an easy device of creating legislation. We had an education policy, if you recall, education for all. I think Kapil Sibal had said that legislation, nothing is happening about it, right? So you could create legislation, create a legal system, and you can begin to say that you've done your job. So we need new ways of seeing the city and understanding its processes to navigate our future. What if, and this is a question I'm posing to the House, what if the city is seen as an accumulation of layers of natural and man-made systems and its gradual transformation through various human imaginations and interventions? While there could be many, one sees them at 3 major formulations, which I call the urban stratums. Now, this was the theoretical formulation that I created in the school to kind of put these things to the students to begin to understand the cities through these things. A set of thick layers that are formulated through several human imaginations and interventions. These layers intermingle to disrupt and reconstitute themselves into new layers and ecotones over time. The 3 stratums are seen as the ecological landscape, which is what I think by and large Makag's realm was. Number 2 is the economic order landscape, and I'll explain this to you a little bit. And the 3rd is the digital technology. I call it the cloud. So it's almost the section of the earth, right? I mean, as we understand, there is ground in the natural system. You have a city, which is the creation of an economic order. The idea of the city is actually a product completely of human imagination, of money, territory, ownership. Can you imagine money? It's just human imagination. It doesn't grow anywhere. It's not natural, right? So that is the imagination. So that the second layer is that. And the 3rd layer is, of course, the cloud. And I'll tell you why I make that distinction in a minute. So the first stratum is the ecological landscape. This is seen as the base layer set out as a natural system. For long, this system has been largely undisturbed, though agriculture and other productive activities have added layers of intervention and reconstituted ecological systems. These are not seen to be detrimental to human habitation. Its thickness continues to constitute various ecosystems. The second stratum is the landscape of economic order. The second stratum is a significant formation. It began to gain its thickness after the introduction of new economic order proposed by the Scottish philosopher and economist Adam Smith, the ground was reconstructed with a new imagination. Imaginations of a new value system that produced new ways of organizing human life around some of the key principles that form the economic order. This was based on a new order of production and consumption. The second stratum of ground intermingled with the first stratum to produce a new ecology that generated several conditions that benefited humankind. Location, territory, and boundaries became essential elements of this economic order that worked with ideas of wealth of nations, territory, location, new definitions of development, and its measurement, trade, and globalization. All of this leads to a process of urbanization and a certain urban form. On one hand, it produces an improved quality of life. However, on the other, it also generates other forms of habitation that were unexpected or undesirable. It made settlements vulnerable to the impact of environmental degradation and climate change. I think this is where the future is. And we have to really carefully think about this. And the formation, the third stratum is the cloud. So the third stratum has been emerging for some time recently. The city is going through a technological change. This change will need a closer interrogation for its spatial generative processes. This stratum substantially disrupted the idea of nation, territory, location, manner and nature of trade, transactions, and more recently, globalization. In its basic configuration, this stratum is ubiquitous and restructures the idea of physicality and presence and time. The digital world has developed widespread and deeper connections with things at another level. There are many more things connected today to the internet than people. These things have a personality by way of intelligence and behavior. The Internet of Things generates new opportunities for new formations of spatial systems. However, in the digital environment, transformations and redundancies are rapid. The speed of transformation is increasing, while at the same time, the space between two change events is also narrowing. And I just want, many of us here will remember a fax machine, right? Some of us may remember a pager. It came and it went, right? So the third stratum is generally a new ecology. With the current environment, it will disrupt many of the existing formulations and spatial arrangements to make way for new ones. Here is the thing for architects. Space and spatiality will require new definitions that range from built environment as understood in today's world, virtual spaces of new imaginations, to the absence of space defined by a nirgun and a nirakar existence. It's quite possible. We will be beginning to design spaces that have no physicality. And it's quite possible. What would this agile, non-spatial, location-independent and temporary form of urban be, and how would it juxtapose itself with the predominant layers of the existing system? This is the key question for all of us to think about. So the future beckons us to forge a symbolic relationship with our environment, where our urban space evolve as dynamic, responsive, and inclusive realm. This is a journey that calls for innovative thinking and a reconstruction of our values and a commitment to creating cities that are not only smart in their use of technology, but also wise in their understanding of human and environmental context. We must envision urban environments that are not just efficient but sustainable, where the pursuit of smartness is aligned with the well-being of all its inhabitants and planet Earth. Thank you. So that's it. I have some projects to show, and I want you to, I think we've been kind of able to connect some of these ideas, and so I'll just kind of run you through these projects. Very often, we do, in our practice we have, we use competitions as an opportunity to exactly talk through design of what I just spoke about, pretty much. Okay? So I will just show you some examples of these. Okay. Can you go to the first slide? Can you go to the first slide? The first one. I just want to, okay. So this was a competition for a very small park called the Mahim Nature Park, which actually Salim Ali had started in Mumbai on the Meethe River. And basically Salim Ali was applauded at that time for the fact that he made it into a bird park over a garbage dump. Okay? Little did he know that the water will be contaminated so badly over the period of time that the pollutants started leaching into the ground. And so we did a little bit of a technical study, and I'm telling you that there in these, this was a competition, by the way. It was an open international competition by MMRDA. This was one which we won. We did it together as a team of 3 officers, Ratan Batliboy, Sameep Padora in our office. And so it was just a competition for that park, all right? When we visited the park, I knew that I cannot come to this park because the damn river there is stinking like hell. So we asked a question, do we need to follow the boundaries? Right? Let's look at the continuum. Let's go. So this is just showing what that space was. Okay? Mumbai in an estuary in 1700, how it kind of, and it's kind of finally cramped into a very tight this thing. Now it was also very interesting that it probably had one of the most complex dynamism, because it was dry in non-monsoon period. It would be in monsoon, high tide and low tide would kind of begin to create havoc and all of that. So there was tremendous amount of dynamism that was concerned. Can we go to the next slide? So the position we took here was that we took the opportunity to expand our brief for our own selves, to say that you cannot look at this just by itself. And we said that we will look at the overall system to figure out what needs to be done. Okay? And so that was the river, and that MNP is where the park was, which we were supposed to work on, and there was supposed to be from the park, there was supposed to be a footbridge that took you across to BKC. That's BKC, the Bandra Kurla complex, which in itself is the first big violation, environmental violation, because that damn thing is built on mud flats. Okay? But I remember my first lesson at SPA, where our planning teacher told us that the Yamuna front is a no high-rise building front. You cannot build high-rise here. The only one who has violated this law is DDA, which was across the road. Right? So anyway, so let's go ahead. So this was a study that we did. Broadly, I just wanted to tell you what we did was we started looking at multifunctionality of this space. Firstly, we broke the boundary of the project. We went to see much beyond it and actually looked at what are the systemic options and how do we create an opportunity or open up a conversation on what needs to happen to the city and particularly its fronts. Can we go further? I'll just quickly run you through this. So this is where we started looking at how do we remediate this space, right? So instead of, right now the MITI is channelized, right? They have built walls because they think walls can protect. Engineering mindset. I'm sorry, I hope there are engineers here, right? So everything is an engineering solution. So what we did is that one of the first arguments that we made is that if you want to become a resilient space, then you must allow for variability and work a section out in that whole space that allows for that fluctuation. So, and then because there was, if you recall, I mentioned in my paper, in my talk, that most of the poor sit and settle by these edges, because these were undefined soft spaces of the city. They most of the time kind of occupy these transient spaces between land and water, and therefore they were, that whole system began to, apart from the industries, of course, the industries were the bigger culprits, but these settlements also began to become industries and started disposing a lot of waste into the thing. So we created a section where you could actually remediate that whole discharge, and it also becomes a resilience infrastructure. Can we go to the next? Right. So it was a multi-tiered thing. So it was a resilience section, and then it also became a recreational section. Can we go to the next? And that's how we worked this whole thing out. So now, if you take away the singular objective of any of these redevelopment slum rehabilitation programs, where what is happening in Mumbai is the sole purpose right now is to unleash the economic value of that land. Period. There's nothing more. But what we were arguing was that in fact, in some of these sensitive areas, this has to be a multi-layered space that also then becomes a resilience infrastructure. And what we demonstrated here is that you can meet the need to rehouse them right here. But then you can liberate that land to become the urban infrastructure, right? And I think one of the arguments we made that to the government is that the government is absolving itself of its responsibility. And so it must kind of begin to take these positions. So also what we proposed here was, if you really look at the labor market in Mumbai, people come in from Ratnagiri and all of these places who are actually agricultural workers who come into the city, do some physical labor, and then go back to their villages to sow the rice and paddy and this and that and the other. So whenever there is, so they are like shifting people. So one of the things that we also recommended was that you could actually begin to produce urban food in this space. Let's go further. So basically, broadly, this is the kind of strategy that we said, that the river edge can become something which could be, developed as a infrastructure. Can we go ahead next? And then, of course, there were many details which there were about 100 slides for this presentation. But the broader idea, the point I wanted to drive home was that we firstly transcended the boundary of the competition, started looking at it as a larger system and a larger solution to the problem. And so, because there is no way that you can improve the condition of that park just by doing something to itself, right? Go ahead. So that was the park there, and of course we had to do whatever we had to do, but go ahead, next. And so we did these several studies, sections of what different conditions could be generated. Go ahead. Go ahead. I think I'm going to run very quickly. So this was a case that the other argument, again, this was very speculative. In fact, the Needy chief was one of the jurors, and he said, "You're speculating." But he said, "I like your courage of speculating," and so, whatever it is. So basically here the problem was that, as I said, there was only 60 centimeters of soil over the garbage dump that was put at the time when Salim Ali made the bird park. But by the time the contamination had started rising, it never permitted the roots to penetrate. However, the most recent enemy nowadays is plastic. And so when we spoke to the authorities, they said that trees fall because there is plastic underneath. And so I did a quick study on the composition of garbage in the 60s. There was no plastic, or hardly any, right? So it's, but it is basically this, that the brackish water started rising up, never allowed the roots to really firmly hold themselves. And so we actually created some technological solutions of pumping in water into the root zone and kind of trying to push the this thing down. Go ahead, go to the next one. So that's it. Let's go to the next one. This is the second competition. So the first one is talking about, the first competition is talking about the idea of transcending boundaries, really looking at the larger picture and, creating a multi-layered master plan or a landscape for the space. This was a, again, as I said, whenever we do competitions, we grab the opportunity to make a statement, to make a positional statement, shall we say. This was, and when we started working on this, I knew that I'm not going to get any prize. This was the Golden Temple entrance competition, and I'll give you a little bit of a quick history for it. As you know, Golden Temple is completely operated on Kar Seva. Every other temple of the 6 is actually on Kar Seva, right? They themselves do Seva and they support and they actually manage and operate these spaces. And they take a lot of pride in it. That is literally their identity. Okay? When the when the Golden Temple attack happened, the perimeter of the Golden Temple was pulled down. And they redid the entire space, and actually Ravindra bounded that whole landscape around the Golden Temple. And they made enough space for the tanks to go in if they need to go in again. So the position we took here is that a state cannot treat its own people this way. We cannot break trust. And it is the responsibility of the state to rebuild that trust. Because it took away the right of the Sikh community to take care of its own environment and build it, right? This was the last piece of land. Can you go to the next slide, please? This was the last piece right in front of the Golden Temple, which was to be designed as an arrival space. So what we actually said was, this is now a social engineering project and not an architectural project. So if you see those slides there, that is nothing but to say that we begin Kar Seva again. Okay? And I did a simple geometric arrangement of how the bricks could be collected. And so the landscape of that space was something which would, kind of evolve over time. And the bricks were being collected. And finally, all that we did was to have a brick paved plaza with a forecourt of trees under which Guru Nanak used to sit. That was it. And so basically it became an idea of giving back to the Sikhs the trust that we need to build between state and the people, and using an instrument which is very, very, very frugal, so that anybody and everybody can come and contribute. Of course, we did not win the competition. Let's go to the next one. Go ahead. I think this is a very recent project. I think many of us here may have participated. Of course, this is also another one which we did not win, but we wanted to make a statement, and so we made it. And I'll tell you what we wanted to say. So I wanted to say exactly all that I read here today, okay? Is to say that we need to begin to rethink land use, FSI, all that story. We need to question our consumptions and whether we can generate a form of architecture or an accumulation of buildings which actually begins to allow you to do that. Let's go to the next slide. Can we go to the next? So this was a project of Urban Swaraj, as I said. Now what does that mean? I'll come to the next slide. Can we go to the next slide? Okay. So this is what was expected. Right? Because we were told an FSI number, this is what eventually it should become, this is the car parking standard, blah, 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 blah. Can we go to the next one? So that's what it meant. Let's go to the next one. Let's go further. I think let's stay here. So this is where we questioned the idea of FSI. And what we said was the conventional way you would look at the site is what is the FAR? Does anyone know why FAR is 3 at a particular place? No one knows. There is no argument available for why is it 3, why is it not 2.5, and why is it not 3.5. Right? There is no logic to it. The only logic that I remember is 1 and then increase to 1.33, and I can explain that to you. Okay, so FAR, buildable permissions, what is the objective now? To consume all the FSI? Right? So, anyway, this is what I've done for another university project, so I just inserted this slide to explain that because it explained it better. Okay, so then you calculate all your demands, water at 135 liters, blah, 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 all of that, and you go ahead and design the building. We said we'll abandon that. Again, we were pretty certain that it will not even be considered because it doesn't look at FSI. Right? So what did we say? We said this site offers us some water in monsoon. This site offers me some energy through its sun. These are 2 things. And the third most important thing, as I said, is I can construct a culture on this campus that will reduce demand. In fact, we are right now working on a university project where we are talking about these ideas, and I said, why don't we do a debit card for showers for students, right? 10 showers a month. Otherwise, you please consume a bucket, right? So, no, we'll have to do that, right? So, this is what we did. Can we go to the next? So we had Swati from Terra Verdes, who's based in Hyderabad, who is a person who works on sustainability mathematics and calculations and guides a lot of things. So this is what we worked out, okay? And we started looking at can it produce an architecture which will generate that kind of a thing. Now, there was an architectural program which we had to comply to, so we tried to comply as much as we could. But our argument was that it's only in the last 250 years we have become indoor as a species. We've otherwise been always outdoor, right? And in Bangalore's weather, there is no reason why I cannot have an institution that is more outdoor than indoor, right? And so my demands on many things will just go down. Let's go ahead. So these are all calculations that we did. Can we go to the next one? Go ahead. Yeah, this is about the human habitation history, as I told you. Okay? So that's why we have these flat standards which we have created for ourselves. This is what my argument is, that we are so colonized in our thinking, we are just carrying on what we've been taught, told, and taught and told. And we're not thinking for ourselves. And we need to really begin to rethink in many more ways, because our problems are relatively far more complex. And our problem is even more serious with a deepening democracy, that we are a democracy and we are a poor country. There is no model for this in this world. And so for us, all of us, I look at it as a great opportunity to think and be more and more creative. Can we go to the next slide? Right, so we thought, let's abandon this fellow as much as we can. Let's work with covered and open spaces. Go ahead. Please go ahead. Yeah, move it. How do you dismantle a physical space? You dismantle it digitally. You don't need a classroom to teach anymore. Really, right? You may need to meet occasionally, and you can meet outside. You don't need to meet inside. Right? And so here we were actually strategizing how we could actually digitally kill the need for physical space. Go ahead. So that's what I said. The digital world is space agnostic. It doesn't require physical space. Can we go to the next one, please? Right. Go ahead. Go ahead. Just keep going. Go ahead. I think just stop it. So that's what we did. So the roof structure that you saw were all water holding tanks. Okay? The rainwater was collected on there. Right? And then finally they got down here, and then that water was. And this on the top were solar panels. Right? So we created a system. There were many more details for it, which I have not put it here. But that's what we did. And we made it, so the question was, the basic question, the argument we were making was that how do you build within the carrying capacity of that parcel of land? So that was the idea. And there is that image that tells you what it is. Go ahead. So that's how we kind of communicated our idea, and that's where it ended. Can we go to the next one? Okay. This is the last piece. All due credit to Savita, my boss. So this is a project where we worked for the first time. Probably we worked with people from other fields on this project. We worked with Pradeep Kishan. I don't know how many of you have heard of him, know him. He's a naturalist. And we worked on this hotel project. The claim to fame of this place is the Six Senses Hotel. The claim to fame is Katrina Kaif got married here. So that I'm sure will locate, everybody will be able to locate it. So anyway, the important thing, and I have to say that काफी बार architecture में ना तपस्या करनी पड़ती है. Savita worked on this project for 7 years. Okay? And I cannot tell you the emotional turmoil she went through, because it was very difficult. Because you can imagine, in a 7-year hospitality project, many people came and went. And many people at senior positions came and went with many different ideas. But she had to stick to this ground that she will make a landscape which will make a substantial difference. What was the idea? The idea was, this is a Six Senses Hotel, okay? They believe that they are above Oberoi's and stuff like that, right? We could redefine luxury, right? And so we worked the entire landscape with native plants, almost, shall I say, barring a few courtyards where we had to do, because they were shade loving, they were shade, so some of it could not happen. And it was an old fort, which was part of the buildings were demolished. That very stone was recycled into landscape. All plants that were used were native. They've gone to places to collect. Now, there are no nurseries that give you native plants. Difficulty, right? So things like that. I mean, it was quite a tapasya, shall we say. But we created a landscape and we sold the idea, and they now sell this idea that the wilderness and the native character is the luxury that you enjoy. So it's no more that static lawn, beautiful trees, flowering plants, and it's no more of that. And I'll just show you something. Let's go ahead. This is the banquet lawn. Okay? So actually on one of these rocks, probably Katrina and they probably had their wedding. Go to the next one. So here it is. This was the punchline, right? This project attempts to shift the paradigm of luxury landscapes from one of excess to one of frugality, awareness, and a new aesthetic that celebrates its context, right? Go ahead, next. So that's the context and the setting of the whole thing. This is about 2.5 hours away from Jaipur. Go to the next slide. Just quickly run through the slides. Go ahead, go to the next one. So that's the old part, and this was, Nimish Patel was the architect while he was alive. So they did the rest of the buildings and all of that. Go ahead, go to the next one. So that's the courtyard. So that's the new building, of course. Go to the next one. These are the courtyards of the suites. This is where we used a few of the exotic plants. But this is what I want to show you. Go back. Go forward. Yeah. Raw stone from site was actually used. It was repurposed, and it was also then crafted in certain cases, right? So we engaged local craft into this, which is what is our tradition, right? So we got these, we kind of repurposed much of the local material within the site. Can we go to the next one, please? Yeah, this gives you an idea. Go ahead. Go ahead. So the idea of collecting water, cleaning it, so it kind of, we started constructing a language out of it, right? This is something that I learned in Jaisalmer when I took my students, that how do you make a language out of everything? For example, in Jaisalmer, the lake has, there's a wall and there are certain artifacts that you see on the wall. They are only to tell the community, these many days are left. Change your practices, right? So, and then that becomes the art and the culture of that place. Can we go ahead? Next. Right, so this was the water holding strategy, which was also this thing. Go ahead, next. Next. Here it is. This is the kind of planting that this whole project has. Is there another slide after that? Yeah. Go to the next one. Go to the next. It kind of gives you a sense of how it belongs in some ways to the overall ruggedness of the landscape. Go to the next one. I think that's it. So recently this project got an award at the International Federation of Landscape Architects in Tokyo. So that was it. So that's it. So we basically try to work with, not on all projects, I must be very honest, but wherever we get the opportunity, we try to put these ideas together into our work. Thank you. Thank you for your patience as well.
Thank you, sir. That was indeed a Wonderful presentation. A pretty knowledge sharing presentation from you. It seems like I was sitting in a classroom, sir. Thank you for that.
There's no question. It's time for vote of thanks. I think we can interact after this.
Yeah, we
also,
can.
you have a beautiful panel put up there at the back.
Team is present.
So time for the vote of thanks. I take this opportunity and take great pleasure in thanking and narrating this vote of thanks. First of all, I thank architect Ravindra Punde sir for coming from very far and sharing his ideas and deliberating on this very, very pertinent issue. It's truly decolonizing our thoughts and the manner we work. That it's time that we start thinking about it. Thank you very much for that. I also thank our sponsors, Voltas, for sponsoring our today evening's event, and also what is waiting upstairs just on the upper floor, which is just minutes away. And I most importantly thank all of you, all the members and other members of the audience who has made time for visiting this program. Many of us are having other engagements today evening also and have multiple events to attend, even though that is there, but taking out time and spending in this particular fellowship and listening to this lecture was very, very appreciable from the IIA West Bengal chapter. So thank you all for that. And please join us for the fellowship dinner on the third floor. Thanks. Good night.